We need to admit what has happened in this nation, and we need to decide that we're going to move forward as a new people, a people who recognize that we can move forward in a more unified and a more caring level. Reverend Vernon E. Carter was a Lutheran pastor who became involved in the social justice or injustice issues of the Boston school desegregation movement in 1965. He grew up in New Bedford, a place where abolitionism and social justice issues he'd heard from childhood. At the age of 15 years old, he knew he was going to move in the direction of ministry as his vocation. The church had been doing the work to bring up the level of existence for Black people from the time he was about 23 years old. And whatever post he was at, he would be drawn to any type of racial issues. He challenged the General Electric Company. He challenged the Postal Service. The fact there had been no Black postmaster or people running the post office. He got involved with the hospital in Greenwich, Connecticut, where there were no Black nurses. His philosophy and Dr. King's philosophy were very much in sync. He realized that true change in a community had to be a unified effort. He talked about de facto segregation. I remember growing up hearing that often. It is a type of structure by which it is just understood within the community that these segregated spaces are to be maintained, without it necessarily being a law in place. De jure segregation has to do with laws that have been set up to maintain a segregated society. And so for Black families specifically in Boston, in the early 1960s, they had been relegated to certain neighborhoods and within those neighborhoods to certain schools. Brown versus Board of Education and the 1954 law passed by the Supreme Court said segregation has to be finished here. Segregation is done. But unfortunately, Boston didn't recognize that, as many states and communities didn't recognize it. There was not a lot of conversation in the public concerning the resistance to the segregated state of the schools. Ruth Batson, Paul Parks, Ken Goskett, these folks, they tried to go back to the Boston School Committee, but the Boston School Committee was not open to even talking about racial desegregation. These folks left that meeting completely disheartened. There was this conversation of, Vernon, what are we going to do? We are at our wits' end. And so he says to them, give me 24 hours. Goes home that evening, and he basically stays up through the night praying. A point within that time period, and actually took 48 hours, he begins to have this vision that just comes up of doing this vigil. He struggles with that because he knows he has to leave his pulpit to do it. He knows that his family is going to be in a difficult position by doing that. He doesn't know if his denomination will support him, and that means his income as well. He doesn't know if his church will support him. He comes to the resolve that, yes, this is something that he feels is coming out of heaven. And my father's response was, I am going to take a leap of faith and I am going to step out because there is no other recourse at this point. And he calls Ruth Batson up and he says, I'm going to put on a placard and I'm going to walk in front of that building until that school committee makes a decision. But my father always believed that this was not really a protest, and that's why it was called a vigil. It was to be a vigil of prayer, a vigil of love, and to spark and awaken the consciousness of a city. It was a tremendous moment in his life. He had come to this moment in time To be a point person, he really felt that it was time for clergy to come out from behind the four walls and come into the street and to be a presence for the poor, for those who were marginalized. They came together as community activists, they came together as families, and they came together as clergy. You had Christian clergy, you had Catholic clergy, Jewish clergy, Unitarian Universalist clergy, so many different people groups, Black, white, many different races who came together. It was one of the most unifying events of Boston's history. The coverage was just pretty amazing in the way that they just told the story so that you could actually see it in your mind as if you were being transported onto the street. They would interview my father, they would interview other people there, they would interview the walkers. Churches came and held their services on the street. They sent choirs to sing on the street. It was the most amazing event. It was the reporters who really captured moments, captured my father's demeanor, his exhaustion. He only slept 3 hours a day. Captured the moment that he collapsed somewhere within 50 days or so of his constant walking and had to be hospitalized for 10 days. But the vigil kept going because as he was being carried, he calls back and says, "Stay on the line. Keep the line, don't stop. We have to keep this vigil going." He was trying to reach out to Congress during the time that he was in the hospital, still working, still trying to make an influence. After the hospital released him, he came back on the line again, walking 21 hours a day, and never had a physical problem after that. He had been living in a little van for that 114 days. When he left, and he got into his van, and one of the reporters watched him in this process and watched him close up his chair and stand for a moment looking at the street, and he gets into the van and he drives off. Even though the school committee never admitted the fact of segregation, it brought to light the injustice. It brought to light what the issues were. The vigil was for him the culmination of all of the experiences he had had before. My father and the steering committee, who was formed to help with the needs of the vigil, began to realize that something legal had to happen. When you start attacking money, that tends to ruffle feathers. They began to look in the direction of creating a racial imbalance act that would attack the racial imbalance and that would open up better funding, more equal funding for Black schools and Black neighborhoods. Became a focus on the whole community now. The first bill was dead on the floor. A second one was written with my father present and others working together with Senator Bowling. Eventually it got passed. Governor Volpe signed it into law. My father was there at the signing. Governor Volpe gave my father the first pen and said, "Vernon, this is happening because of you." For my father, that was a huge victory. It was a statement saying that right can triumph. My father wrote what he considered to be his manifesto, what he called the third and final emancipation. The first emancipation was the emancipation of the slaves. He believed the second emancipation was King's work in bringing a shift and change to our whole culture and society. Had King lived, he believed that that's where the end of the train, if you will, would stop, and it would be at transformation. In fact, he called it a transformation station. And what he was looking for was a type of final emancipation by which the Black psyche began to understand its own value, its own identification, that Black people would come to the place where they named themselves, where they defined who they were and their capabilities. and their role in this country, apart from that which had been historically done. Agape love comes from the New Testament text through the Apostle Paul. And the idea of agape love means you love someone unconditionally. You love them because they're human beings. That was a key piece of the foundational motivation for my father. My dad would say that he was a human rights activist more than he would even say a Boston civil rights activist. His entire life was spent trying to dismantle racism, dismantle segregation, bring people together, fighting for the causes he believed in alongside MLK. He worked with immigrant communities, helping people become citizens and fighting for immigrant rights. He just kept moving into so many different circles to make a difference with people's lives and their living situations, addressing all kinds of injustices. As long as both black and white can make that effort to come together, there's always hope. The idea of building the hope is really part of the work here. It's letting them know there are people who will fight for that beloved community. There will always be a people who will fight for what's right, always. And as long as that is the case, there's hope.